Welcome back to our next installment of acrylic painting techniques. With this video, we are going to be going over hatching, stippling, scumbling, and cross hatching. As a class, we have gone over these before, so nothing here should be terribly new, except for being able to do these techniques with our paintbrushes. So for our first hatching, I am going to be using the flat brush, and just like I did with our large and small stroke, I am going to pull on the bristles just a little bit so that it really narrows out the tip of that brush. That's going to give me a nice thin line. So I'm going to start with my darkest color, my phthalo blue, and create vertical hatches with my brush. As I continue working, my brush will flower a little bit, which means that the bristles expand. So I want to take my brush on my palette and kind of dab it off to create that nice thin line again. That'll help me create nice thin lines on my paper. So hatching is a layering technique. You don't really ever want to see your canvas or your paper through your hatching technique, through most of your techniques. That's why some of ours have the paint underneath. But you can't hatch with one color and fill up a space and still keep a texture. So this is where you want to start working with other colors. Now my paper says 3 values. Well, yellow has a different inherent value than blue, so that is a different value. And then I also have white, which is my lightest value, being a very, very light neutral, and I'll be able to work in 3 different values to create multiple visual layers. So I'm going to wipe my paintbrush off because I have all of that dark color on there and all of that yellow before I pick up my white. This will keep my canvas, or in this case my paper, from looking muddy. That's when your colors mix together too much, when you want them to have a separation. Using black to darken a color can also make a color look muddy, especially if you're trying to darken red with a black. Black is a very, very dark blue pigment. So if you end up trying to darken yellow, or you try and darken orange, you're going to end up getting a brown with the orange and a very dark, ugly green with the yellow, because black is that super dark blue pigment. It mixes with the color and it changes it. So hatching is very similar to our small stroke, but our lines are thinner, and I am going to go back over it with my yellow to create really, really strong contrasting lines that can either be long or short, but they're thin. Hatching is all about creating these thin lines. And now I'm going to go back over it with my blue to add back in some of those shadow lines. Doing this technique with a light green, a dark green, a white, and a black creates wonderful grass. So it seems as if we have some techniques here that are really nice for certain types of landscapes. So we have smooth water, choppy, rough water, and we have grass. I'm not saying that those are the only objects that you can paint with these techniques, but those are really popular with these techniques. So now stippling. I like to use a round brush for stippling because it has a nice point to it and it's a rounded point. So I'm going to pick up some of my blue, and just like I did before, I'm going to be working in 3 different values. Stippling is a process of dotting. We have done this before. It's easiest with paint and marker. It's kind of difficult with colored pencil and our regular pencils, things that had that sharp point. But paint just blobs on, dabs in, and you can add in lots of layers here to create this visual texture. When I'm working with stippling, I tend to be making something that's pretty organic, like the leaves of a tree. And you can create a really nice transition of dark to light with stippling by adding more of your darker value and then adding more of your lighter value where you need it. The more you stipple in one area, the more you are going to smooth out that texture. So in this area up here at the top, if I stipple, you can see that it still has a slight texture, but it pretty much goes away. So if I add in just a few dots of the yellow, it comes back. So you'll want to fill in this entire box with stippling, working with different values. Now here I have just worked with 2, and you can see that the blue is mixing with the yellow to create a green. I can also add that blue back in. Blue is a really great shadow color, especially phthalo blue. It's a wonderful shadow color for things that are cool colors. Yellow is a wonderful highlight color, especially for natural items or things that are green, and you can mix the yellow into the green a little bit. Here I'm going to add some white. I'm not going to add a lot of white because I don't want that high contrast. And I'm going to stipple the white in just a little bit more so that it blends with the colors that are there. So you can have areas that are not stippled very much, like right over here, especially up here in the top corner. So you can see the contrast between the dark blue and the light yellow. Or you can stipple in one area a lot and have a low contrast and a very, well, not a very, but a slightly smoother texture. For scumbling, I am also going to be using the round brush. I'm just going to add a little bit of water to my brush. It's going to make my paint smoother and easier to scumble with. Because remember, scumbling, we had talked about it, especially in colored pencil, it's your pencil stumbling across the paper. So in this case, it's your paintbrush, which is stumbling across the paper. Scumble, stumble, a little bit easier to remember the technique. And I tend to work in figure eights and swirls, but that doesn't mean that you have to. You can work in zigzags. It is a scribble, but it's a controlled scribble. And something that's wonderful about Scumble is you can build up layers with this as well, working with different colors, and those colors can blend together, or those colors can be very separated, depending on how much you brush with your paintbrush. Adding a little bit of water to my brush helps create a smoother line. You don't want to add too much water to your brush, or else you're going to end up creating what's called an acrylic wash. And we'll get to that. That's something that we'll be working on in another video. Adding a little bit of white there, creating that high contrast. This is something great for bushes or plant life that may be farther away. You can make your scumbling really small, and then that'll make a smaller texture. This is also really a good technique for clouds. So adding in just that small little texture there and a little bit of contrast with my yellow. And that's Scumble. So our last technique is cross hatching. And since you've already seen hatching with a flat brush, I am going to do cross hatching with my round so that you can see what that technique would look like with a different type of brush. Each brush will have its own type of brush stroke, so you might find that you work better with a flat, you might find that you work better with a round. There are angled brushes too, which I really like. So here we go, cross-hatching. So remember, cross-hatching is lines that cross. So you can't just go in one direction, but these lines are straight lines. So you don't want to curve them at all. Your lines can be vertical or horizontal, but they are going to constantly be filling in the space, crossing each other. So you can see that this brush creates a different type of brush stroke and allows my paint to be nice and thin. So I don't have to pull on the brush at all. I don't have to change what the bristles look like. I just continuously add more lines on top. Cleaning my brush off so I can get some yellow and really create some brightness and contrast, especially in color. This would be fun with orange to see how the colors neutralize as they mix, but this is fun creating green as well. So I would continue on with this to fill in the entire space, continuing to layer up the blue and the yellow until the space is full. Again, you're trying to cover up your canvas, or in this case here, your paper. It will eventually be canvas that you are working on. Cross-hatching is a nice texture for cloth or clothing. With that, you'd probably want to use a thinner round or a smaller round with a finer point. This is a pretty broad stroke for something, unless it's really, really close up, like macro photography or photomicrography, which this would be an interesting technique for that. So one more layer of yellow. I feel like there's not enough contrast here. And we're done. So in this video, we have gone over hatching, stippling, scumbling, cross-hatching. After you finish these techniques that we have just gone over, take a look at them and see which ones you feel like you have really mastered. Circle the ones that you really, really like to do and are good at, because those are ones that you can remember for your painting. So again, keep an eye out for the next video for sgraffito, stamping, and have fun with these techniques.